Well, the one thing that Jeremy didn't mention that may have come up under some other occasion is that I am a lawyer, I'm a second career lawyer, but for the last 10 years I've been teaching law. I'm a law professor. And you know, whenever I begin a session, I think this is a little bit hot. If we could tune this down just a tad. I know there's some folks here who would like to doze off, and it's kind of hard when that happens. So hold this down just a little bit, and so we give these folks a chance to take a break. In any event, one of the things when I begin a class, a law class, and you have a bunch of students who are lawyer wannabes, and you can kind of visualize that sometimes I just kind of have to set out, this is what's going to happen, this is what we're going to do, and this is frankly the expectation I would have with respect to what I'm going to bring and with respect to any response I might get from the class. You know, there are some subjects in law, you can visualize these for, if you work at it for a moment, that are fraught with peril. I call them FWP. These are just FWP. They're fraught with peril. In other words, there's a variety of opinions, there's a variety of interpretations, and sometimes, you know, feelings are aroused and emotions are aroused. And I can tell you that as I think of subjects, raising children fraught with peril. I'm just going to tell you that there are a variety of experiences that people have had. Some are just totally certain that they know exactly what to do, and some have no clue. Whatever the case, here's what I would like to suggest we do. I'm going to do my very best to give you no personal examples. None. I'm just not going to give you any. You know, I have some, but I'm not going to do that. And I would ask you, please, and I think this is important, if anyone here has a question at some point, and I have a point at which I'm going to ask you to avoid questions unless I say something too quickly. You didn't understand what I said, just please raise your hand so we'd say it again. I missed it. But generally speaking, I would prefer you hold your questions until a time we might set aside for that specifically. So, but in any event, if you ask a question, I would prefer that you not say, well, you know, my son, you know, we did this, or you know, I have a cousin who did that. I would prefer no personal examples. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I can tell you that we could take several minutes to talk about it, but just trust me, that's really fraught with peril when we start giving personal examples. And so I would prefer that we look at things on this subject conceptually. And I'm hoping that it'll be meaningful. My expectation is that it will. I certainly intend for it to be meaningful and instructive and helpful, but we're going to avoid personal examples, please. Second thing I would mention is that the way I intend to structure these three sessions, and when Jeremy discussed these with me, I wasn't sure the best way to conduct this. I'm still not sure this is the best way, but here's what I feel the Lord has led me to do. This morning I'm going to discuss with you some specific examples from the Scripture that we get, where we have evidence about the parents and the children. Now, clearly, argument could be made that with the exception of two people, everybody had a mother. Adam and Eve, as far as we know, did not. With the exception of three people, everyone had an earthly father. As far as we know, Adam and Eve didn't, and Jesus didn't. But other than that, every example we could use in the Bible, we could get. There was no doubt a parental relationship of some kind with the children. However, there are some where we know some things about the parents and we know some things about the children, and it's those in which I'm going to use primarily for examples, and hopefully we'll be able to get some instruction from what we know. When we know something about the parents, we know something about the children, and some things occurred. So hopefully we'll get some principles from there. So this morning, my expectation would be to spend some time talking about some specific examples. May get through with that this morning or not. I understand clocks. Yeah, and I promise you, I know my son's watching the clock, but no more than my students watch the clock. I promise you, I know how many minutes. I got what I got, and I'll either get through with that or I won't get through with that. This evening, my expectation is to talk about some things that the Scripture says, specific instructions. In other words, admonitions, some commandments, some things that we're supposed to do. Not necessarily focusing on individuals or examples from the Scripture, but what the Scripture tells parents, children. Some of those scriptures come quickly to your mind. The fact is, I don't think I have one that I've intended to bring that's going to be a surprise to anybody. That's what I expected to discuss this evening. Next Sunday evening, my expectation would be to discuss with you the law. There are people that are concerned for a variety of reasons of how the law might affect them. I'm speaking. I'll be addressing particularly the law with respect to the state of Florida, but there are some things that would go beyond the state of Florida as well, that would be important for parents to know. I'm just going to tell you, you know this or not know this, but sometimes parents have exposure with respect to what their children do. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the parents have options with respect to their children. Sometimes those options are limited. So I would expect to have to focus on the law next Sunday night. And you know what? To the extent that there are some questions that someone might have, if those are somehow brought to my attention, I'll do my best to have some time before the end of either this evening or next Sunday night to try to address some questions. But please, don't ask me what to do when your child does something. I'm sorry, that's just not something from this perspective that I could give you. All right. We're going to use some examples from the Bible. And I would remind you that all the examples we have in the Bible, all of the instances we have in the Bible are not positive. In other words, there's certainly some examples that didn't go the way they should go. Some folks think that's evidence that the Bible is truth because God did not hide punches. I mean, He didn't hide the ball. He didn't only give us things that were positive. He told us about some things that we can learn from, which are not positive. And so I'm going to use some of those. And I want one last thing I would mention. Sometimes in class, and particularly a class that I teach on jury selection, there's a subject that's particularly sensitive. And I'm just going to give you an example. If you visualize for a moment that there's an auto accident or something, and there's an injury in this auto accident, and among the injuries there's a woman who miscarries because of the accident. Now, I want you to visualize what that... Now that may mean something to you. It means something to me. That there was a child who was not born and never will be. Now, you just have to picture that there are some folks in a jury panel who feel differently about that. And sometimes you have to go into a sensitive area and have some latitude when you're teaching. So when I teach the subject of jury selection, there are others. Race, gender, national origin, sexual orientation. When I teach this, I need some latitude from my students. And I can tell you there's some things we may discuss today that may touch you and it may bite. I just have to know something. There's only 2 families I know anything much about here today. And you know what? We'll get over it. You just need to know that I have no one in mind, no specific example in mind. And if something I say today touches someone, I need that latitude in order for us all to have an opportunity to learn. First example I'm going to use from the Scripture is the first one. The first parent-child relationship. Now, I want everybody to think about this for a second. For those of you that would like or make notes or want to look, it's in Genesis 4. Adam and Eve had a son. Adam and Eve's son's name was Cain. Adam and Eve had a second son. Adam and Eve's second son was named Abel. Now, there's several things we don't know. And I want us also to focus, and whenever I prepare or whenever I study the Scripture, prepare to teach a lesson on it, I always try to bring my mind back to 2 Timothy 3:16. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God. All of it is. And is profitable, yes it is, for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and instruction in righteousness. So I want to tell you something. We got something. There's something here for us. There's something here for us. I'm going to do my best not to go beyond what it says. I'm going to do my best. If I offer an opinion, and occasionally I will, I'm going to say this is my view. This is my view. Well, I'm going to tell you something. There's some things we don't know about the relationship between Adam and Eve and their 2 sons. They had others, of course, but between these first 2, some things we don't know. But I'll tell you one thing we do know. They taught him about God. And I'll tell you how we know they taught him about God, because Abel got it right. His sacrifice was right. So we know that they taught him. Somehow, Abel learned how to do a sacrifice. He learned how God appreciates and he respects a certain type of sacrifice, and Abel made it. But I also know that Cain learned about God. And I know that Cain learned about God because Cain had 2 conversations. It may have been audible. I don't know. But there are 2 records in that 4th chapter, early 4th chapter of Genesis, where Cain discussed things with God. He did. He talked to him. He talked to him, first of all, about the sacrifice, and then, of course, the second conversation was post-murder. When God said, "Where's your brother?" He says, "Well, my brother's keeper." There was at least 2 occasions where God and Cain had a conversation, so we know this. Please, this is the point I want to get from this illustration. Same parents. as far as we know, the same genetic makeup from these two boys, raised in the same house. And they came out differently. Hello, radically differently. Radically differently. One rebellious against God, and the other one totally subject to whatever God chose, whatever God was telling them. And so I need you to know this. Please get this. Today, yesterday, and tomorrow, if the Lord tarries, there will be children within the same household who just turn out differently. They just turn out different. And you know what? There's nothing, we're given no indication whatsoever that they did anything differently with those two boys, but they came out differently. They just came out differently. And that happens. It just does. It happened. It happened with the very first two boys ever born, same parents, same DNA in their heritage, and they came out differently. Apparently taught the same kinds of things because they both knew God. So just please understand this. When you or someone close to you or someone sitting down the row from you or someone who might be grandchildren or a neighbor, when they have two or more than two and they don't come out the same, that's not necessarily anything that the parents did. Just so you know. Just so you know. Okay. The second one I would discuss with you, illustration we have is a guy named Noah. I took these generally chronologically, and Noah shows up in the 6th chapter of Genesis, and Noah. Now, there's some things that we weren't told about Noah, but there's some things we do know. We know for sure that God was upset with what people were doing at this point on the earth, and he looks around and he sees this guy, Noah. Now, Noah must have been, he must have been a good guy. He was the best there was. He was the best on the earth at the time. We know that. So God gave Noah some instructions. And we know that Noah followed those instructions. He followed them to the letter. 120 years. Please, I'm sorry. Think about that for a second. 120 years. Teddy Roosevelt hadn't been president 120 years ago. 120 years it took him to build that ark. And he did it. He did it. And somehow, he had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, that he brought along. Somehow, those 3 boys and their wives, Noah's wife, were on board, literally and figuratively. You know that people mocked Noah building this boat, this huge edifice, no water. He was faithful. He did what he was supposed to do. So they get on the boat, the ark. It rains, and he gets off the ark. And here's where we pick up the story. Those of you who like to follow or like to track it, it's in Genesis 9. And Noah planted a vineyard. I mean, he tilled the ground and he planted a vineyard. And most of you know the story. I assume you do. But let me just tell you that Noah, he took the fruit of the vine and he had wine, and Noah got drunk. He got drunk. Hello, class. Substance abuse. Noah got drunk. He did. Now, I can't tell you. I read these verses. I've read what people said about these verses, and I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know what happened exactly. We can speculate. We can say, this is what must have happened. I don't know exactly what happened, but this I knew, though, because the Scripture told us, and that is that Noah got drunk. He did. He got drunk. And he went to sleep. The implication is he passed out, because when he came around, it says he woke up from this wine, from this drunkenness. So he apparently passed out. Maybe he got so drunk he passed out. And being sensitive to the subject that follows next, you're welcome to read it, if you choose. Somehow he was uncovered. And his youngest son, Ham, saw him in that condition. I don't know what. I can tell you, I can't describe exactly what happened. I don't know. I do know, and I prefer to read this to you. Genesis 9:22, and Ham, the father of Canaan being the grandson of Noah, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brethren without. So Ham went out and told the other guys whatever he had seen. Why don't you look at verse 24. And Noah awoke from his wine he came to, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. But this I do know. This I do know. Whatever happened, it was really, really bad. And there's no indication that it would have happened if Noah had not been drunk in and out of it. There's no indication that if Noah had had his head out of his armpit, if he had been alert, if he'd been paying attention to what was happening with his son, there's no indication that this would have happened. And what happened as a result of this is Noah cursed his grandson, Canaan. I don't understand that either. Some folks speculate that Canaan was there as well. I don't know whether he was or not. I don't know. All I know is this. Noah let his guard down. Noah let his guard down. Apparently a very godly man, faithful, followed what the Lord had him to do. I've known people like that. You may have as well. No personal examples. But I will tell you that Noah let his guard down. And what happened was his son, when that happened, messed up seriously. Now, I want to, the truth we get from this is, regardless of how faithful someone might be, how careful they might be to follow what the Lord specifically says to do, they can let their guard down. Sometimes it's substance abuse, but I would suggest to you, members of the jury, that sometimes it might be something else. They might just take their guard down. Their focus might be gone because of work or because of play or because of something. He let his guard down, and when he did that, his son messed up seriously. I'm going to tell you something. It's important not to let your guard down because bad things happen. Bad things can happen. Sometimes really, really bad things can happen. And you know what? This was substance abuse. And this may touch somebody or touch other people. I don't know. I can only tell you this, that Noah, as far as we know, was dead on the money. Dead on the money. Following the Lord, except he let his guard down. And as a result, something really, really bad happened. And there's another point as well. This was his grandson. And it happened to be that when his grandson was cursed, this was sure enough, it isn't like he didn't cuss him out. This was a curse. And it went to his children and his children. That's right. It went to generations beyond that. Because all we're given is this. Noah let his guard down. Be careful that you don't stop focusing on that which is important. Don't let your guard down. I want to talk to you next about Abraham. Now, Abraham shows up, still in Genesis. He's in the 12th chapter of Genesis. And, there's a ton of things that could be said about Abraham. This old boy, you talk about someone who had the favor of God. Abraham had the favor of God. God chose him, and he was special. It's just really hard to characterize anyone at that moment in history who had more favor with God than Abraham did. Of course, when he was first called, it was Abram, and this begins in the 12th chapter of Genesis. There's a lot of things we know about him, and we could say lots of things about him. I want to discuss in particular his role as a father. Of course, this parent. We almost everybody, of course, could tell this story, certainly has heard this story about Isaac and Abraham being willing to sacrifice his son Isaac. And as far as we know, Isaac was a willing participant. I've known people that say go a little further with that than I think they can. There's a lot of things we don't know about that instance, but that's not the one I want to talk about. We certainly know that Abraham could do wonderful things, and God honored him for it. Hello, forever, still. There's an argument that can be made, and I can make it that today God is honoring his covenant with Abraham and Abraham's people. In any event, the one I want to talk to you about is the time when Abram first went. He left the land, and he went 75 years old, which I've discovered is middle-aged. Some of you need to participate. I could use a couple of amens. Come on, step up here. He left there. And God told him to go to Egypt. And he had a wife whose name was Sarah, and Sarah was what you call it, Sarah was attractive. She was no spring chicken, incidentally. But as he went to Egypt, Abraham was concerned that people would look at his wife and want her for themselves and would kill him so they could get his wife. So he said to his wife Sarah, and I can tell you something, of all the instances I try to picture. I mean, I'm sorry, I can picture people doing stupid things. Maybe because I can picture people doing stupid things, but this one's hard for me to picture. It's really hard for me to picture him saying to Sarah, "Tell everybody you're my sister. So if they want to take you into their house, they won't have to kill me to do it." And that's exactly what happened. They got there, and he said, "This is my sister." And sure enough, Pharaoh took Sarah. God dealt with Pharaoh in such a way that Pharaoh knew what happened. And he calls Abram, and said, what's the deal? This is your wife, not your sister. It's just such an unbelievable thing that Abram did that. But are you ready for this? You probably know this as well. That he had a son. Abraham had a son. Abraham and Sarah had a son named Isaac, who did exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. I mean, as hard as that is to believe, and, as we read the chronology of this, Isaac wasn't there at the time. He must have heard about it. Or else it had to be some overwhelming coincidence when the son did exactly what the father did. But the son did exactly what the father did. And that's found in Genesis, get it in a minute, 26:7. So the men said, "What's this with your wife, Rebecca?" He had a pretty wife. Must have run in the family. He said, "What's this with Rebecca?" He said, just tell us my sister. It's my sister. He didn't want this to happen. So here's what happened. Here's what we know. Abraham is a good guy. I can tell you that you're going to find things on most Bible characters where they royally messed up. And there's some things that clearly that Abraham did, that he should not have done. But overall, let's just agree, he had a special place in God's heart. Abraham did. Abraham did. He left his home, left his family. Lot chose the cities, and he said, "You can have what you want." Abraham did well. God blessed Abraham. Arguably, he still does. But I want to tell you something. He did something he should not have done, and his son did exactly the same thing. And sometimes, like father, that's right. That's right. Some of the stupidest things a parent can do, by example, our kids do the same. Our kids do the same. I wish that weren't true. I wish there were a way to say that children do not follow their parents. But I just need you to know this. Among the things that are important for parents, for me as a parent, for my children as parents, is to set a good example. Abraham was a bad example. He was a bad example. And sure enough, his son did just what he did. That's what he did. Next example I would use, next character I would use to describe with relationship to a parent and the children would be Abraham's grandson, Jacob. Jacob. Now, we get Jacob in Genesis 37. We're still in Genesis 37. That's the verse where I'm going to pick up is in Genesis 37. So Jacob is Isaac's son. You would know this, I'm reasonably sure. There were some issues there, weren't there? And I might have used that as an illustration that Jacob had two brothers, and there were some parent issues that came up. There might have used Jacob as a son, but I want to talk about Jacob as a father. Jacob had 12 sons. 12 sons. The 11th one, hello class, was his favorite. Joseph. 11th. I'm not 100% sure how Benjamin, the 12th one, fit there, because it says that Joseph was a son of his old age. In other words, he'd become elderly by that point. Joseph had a different mother, and he was his favorite. Hello class. He was his favorite. Did you know parents have favorites? They do. I don't even know if it's possible not to, but I do know this. It's a mistake to communicate that to the kids. It's a mistake to communicate that to the kids. Here's what he did. The verse is Genesis 37:3. Israel, which was the name that God had given Jacob, the new name he'd given Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. So here's what happened. Jacob loved Joseph the most. And he said so in a language that could not be misunderstood with this coat of many colors. He rubbed it in the older brothers' faces. I'm sorry, he did. He did. He said to the older 10, I don't love you as much. Do you think they might have known that had he not done the coat of many colors? I don't know. But I know this, that it's a serious mistake for parents to show favoritism with their children. It's a serious, serious mistake. You know, this whole story is just totally amazing if you think about it. 9 of those older brothers attempted to commit murder. They go to the big house today for what they did. In fact, all 10 participated. 1 came back. We know the story. And all 10 of those. Now, there's something else we know about those boys. I should tell you this. There are people, you may have known them, that are just, I'm sorry, they're just bad people. I mean, it's like they're incorrigible, they're not redeemable. I don't mean that in the sense that Jesus could redeem them. What I'm saying is they're bad to the core. These boys were not like that. Not like that. They thought Joseph was gone, and they still repented. You recall when they came down later on, they said God's judging us for what we did. They knew there was a God, and they knew they had done wrong. But they hated him so badly because their dad said, he said it, he screamed it. Joseph's my favorite. If you want to be sure you have trouble with children, you just let one or more of them know that you have a favorite. Just let them know you have a favorite. Bad. Now, I understand that story, and I've had people go to that story and they talk about how this was God used it for good, and God did use it for good, and his brothers meant it for evil. God meant it for good, and ultimately, when he sold down, and I know that whole story. I also know this, that 9 of those brothers were prepared to, in fact, thought they did murder their brother. They hated him so badly because the father showed favoritism. Don't let that happen. Don't let that happen. All right. Next person I want to discuss with you a little bit is Eli. Eli. Now, Eli, you may know all about Eli. I know that you folks generally know these Bible stories. Some of you know them well. But Eli was a high priest. And he had 2 sons, Hophni, I'll get it in a minute, I want to get them right, and Phinehas. Hophni and Phinehas. I think that's the way you pronounce it. Hello, that's the way I pronounce him. Hophni and Phinehas. Now, Eli was the high priest, and he was the spiritual leader. And he had 2 sons that were bad. 2 sons that were bad. Now, I can't tell you exactly why how they got started out bad. I don't know that. We're not told about them when they were young. But here's what we know. When they had reached an age of maturity, and I know they were maturity because of some of the things that they did, they were really, really bad in the temple. There's no reason for me to read you those things. If you want to find them, it's 1 Samuel chapter 2, and I'm beginning like around verse 20. The verse I want to use is at 2:24. So Eli is the high priest, and he's got these 2 sons who are bad. And hello, they're real bad. And among the things we know as you read the verses, the context for that is that Eli apparently found out about it when people reported it. In other words, there's no proof that Eli knew this before somebody told him. I'm sorry, he was out of touch with his sons. That's all we can suppose from that, because people came and reported this to him, and that's how he found out how bad they were. But Eli, hello, knew how bad they were. He knew what they were doing, and it was bad. I'm sorry, it was real, real bad. Read about it. So he rebuked them. And it's in verse 2:24 when it talks about Eli rebuked his son. So he called him and said, you know what, guys, you don't do this. Don't do this. Well, here's what we know. They didn't stop. Nor did Eli do anything else about it. Did you know that sometimes, and incidentally, you know this or don't know this, all three of them died the same day. Dad and the two sons died the same day. Two sons first and then the father. It's really one of the sad places in the Bible. It's with the same day that Eli's grandson was named Ichabod because God had deserted Israel. The Ark of the Covenant was taken by the Philistines. It's really a sad story. But here's the point I want to get to. Eli, there's at least two things we know for sure. Eli was permissive. He allowed his children to do things, his boys in this case, to do things that were totally unacceptable. Did you know that their parents, really, that are permissive? Beyond what they should be in allowing their children to do things they shouldn't do. And a case could be made. I just want you to picture this for a second. This isn't where the temple was, but this picture. This is the place to worship. And Eli not only allowed this to continue in the temple, he had his sons. He gave them the authority to do some of the things that they did. In other words, he was in charge. He was the boss. He not only was permissive, he enabled them. He was an enabler. And I would tell you this may come up next Sunday night. I expect it will. Eli was vulnerable. Eli was subject to the law. Hello. Today, he'd be subject to a lawsuit because of what he did. He was the boss. He was also the father. He failed as a father and as a boss. He allowed them to do things they shouldn't have done, and he was aware of it. He had notice, and yet he put them in a position where they could continue, and they did. And they did. I just have to tell you, I know folks. You know folks. No examples, but we all know folks that are permissive, and in fact, they help. They put their children sometimes in such a place. They provide their children tools, or they provide their children opportunities, even though they know that the outcome of that's likely to be negative. Participate in activities with others. Social media. You couldn't get any more social, in some sense of the word, than those two boys were. And Eli permitted it, and he enabled it. Shame on Eli. Shame on Eli. And hello, class. Shame on any parent who recognizes he knew. He was given notice, apparently by somebody else. He didn't figure it out on his own. I tell you what, there are parents, yes there are, who know that their kids are involved in things in which they should not be involved. And they may remonstrate with them. They may admonish them. He did. But they're not allowed to continue. They provide the tools under which it can continue. And I'm going to tell you something, parents, one of the things that come up next Sunday night, that makes the parents laugh. That makes the parents laugh. In my view, not just at law, but before the Lord. That is my view. Eli. Bad dad. Bad dad. Did things that people do. I think I can get another one in. I want to get this in. David. Some of you heard of it. David. Man after God's own heart. David. And I'm sorry, if you take away a couple of really stupid things about David, I'm sorry that he would be my hero. I'm sorry, I just think David he's just a cool guy. I mean, from a kid, hello, David. I think all of us know about the big one. The big one. That's not what I'm talking about. I want to talk about David as a father. Because I'm going to tell you something. David, who's after God's own heart, was a bad dad. Really was. It really was. It's going to look hard to find success. The one that I particularly find reference to, and you know what? I have some evidence, which I'm going to show you in just a moment, of how that happened. Of how it happened. I mean, it just wasn't that his kids turned out badly, his sons in particular. Hello, the one who turned out pretty well, as far as we can tell, was a father of his mother. His mother gave attention to Solomon, and that may have been the difference with respect to why he came out like he did. But there's one in particular. He had a son just younger than Absalom, and you either know the story about Absalom or you don't. But his dad did not do well with Absalom. In fact, he about lost his whole kingdom because of Absalom. Had a son named Adonijah. And this would be in 1 Kings 1. And this would be verse 5, which I'll reference in just a moment now. But Adonijah, as David was elderly now, he's not well. In fact, he's principally he's taken to bed, to a bed. In other words, he's principally he's not strong like he was. Certainly not as he was in his youth. And his son Adonijah decides he wants to be king. I will be king. He had a son who was proud. So Adonijah gets these horses and chariots and 50 men, and he starts running out. They all run out in front of him, and he says, I'm going to be the king, I'm going to be the king, I'll be the king. And here's what we know about David and Adonijah. 1 Kings 1:5. Then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, that's the mother, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared him chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. That's verse 5. Verse 6. And his father, that's David, had not displeased him at any time, saying, Why hast thou done so? He was a very good man, was a good-looking guy. Apparently his mother bare him after Absalom's younger brother. Here's what happened. At no time, it says here, not one time did David ever say to his son, hold up a second, wait a minute, whoa, wait a minute. David was an indulgent father. Did you know that there are parents that are indulgent? Whatever. David was an indulgent father. He never one time said to this boy, hold up a second. Listen, we need to talk about what you're doing. Just a second. I'm the dad, you're the son. We have to have a conversation. Never once. A sure recipe for a problem with children is to be overindulgent. David was indulgent. Never once said, wait a minute. I'm tell you what, I know parents, you probably do. Just let them go. Hard-pressed to ever find a time when those parents will say to the kids, just a second. Now, you know what? I'm out of time. I have a couple of good examples, and you'll be interested to know. I'll cover these tonight when I begin. They all involve women as mothers. I'm sorry, I don't know what. That's probably a coincidence. Hannah, just so you know. Lois, just so you know, a grandmother. We have some good examples of parenting. Eunice, of course, the mother. So we'll discuss those just briefly tonight. For some reason, they're mothers. I don't understand it. I'm sure it's a coincidence that those turned out real well, and the ones with their fathers not so good. But we'll discuss this briefly tonight before we talk about some of the other things. And I'm out of time, and I'm sensitive to that, so I'm going to have a word of prayer. And then somebody else will say something, or else we'll do something else. Here we go.